2895 Just crazy enough. Sunny stumbled on that particular idea while lamenting how unreasonable the situation he had found himself in was. No, really, it wasn't enough that he had to fight a minor god. That malevolent deity just had to be an undying one on top of that, a sacred foe who literally could not be killed, because he was not a living thing to begin with. Shadow God had taken his death, and therefore, stole away his life as well. The concept of a living being was a complicated one in the world of the nightmare spell. Take Sunny, for example. Technically, he was dead. But in the broader sense, he was still a living being. So was Jet, who could be considered one despite being physically and functionally a magically reanimated corpse. There were all manner of nightmare creatures out there, as well, wraiths, ghosts, and specters of all kinds, golems and automatons, walking suits of malevolent armor, and things that could not even be described, let alone understood. But all of them would still count as living beings, and for one simple reason, because they could be killed. They had shadows, and they had souls. The deathless were neither dead nor alive, though. They had lost their shadows, and no matter how Sunny looked, he could not determine if they had souls either. So, by all accounts, those cursed by Shadow God were not living beings. They weren't ideas or concepts, either, because what constituted them was solid matter. What were they, then? Well, by method of elimination, the answer was simple. They were things. There were all kinds of ways to challenge that statement, but for Sunny, it sounded good enough. The deathless were things. They were no different from items. Cursed things that were controlled by malevolent wills, but items nevertheless. So, then, what kind of memory could help Sunny deal with a sacred thing that had been cursed by Shadow God? He had been considering that question feverishly while at the same time wielding his will to push back the oppressive authority of the sacred thing in question. He even asked himself what kind of memory he could have created to get himself out of this situation, if he was good enough at weaving to create memories on the fly. And then, it suddenly hit him. If the deathless were things, if they were no different from items, then did he really need to make a memory to survive the battle against the wandering Archon? What if he made the Archon into a memory, instead? The question was so preposterous that Sunny instantly threw it out of his head, concentrating on finding an actual solution. However, once the idea rooted itself in his mind, it refused to go, and a few moments later, he found himself coming back to the same question. I have finally lost it. I have, haven't I? But what if he hadn't? Technically, nothing was stopping Sunny from turning a deathless into a memory. A memory was simply an item enchanted with the rudimentary spell weave, after all, which allowed it to be disassembled into soul essence and stored in its master's soul, as well as summoned back to be reconstituted as matter. The deathless had neither a shadow nor a soul. They weren't living beings and were things instead. So if Sunny could just create a rudimentary spell weave, anchor it in a sufficiently pure soul shard, and attach it to the black bones of one of them, then, theoretically, he could dismiss the deathless as he would a memory, and keep it stored in his soul in a disassembled state. It was just that attaching a spell weave to a moving, sinister, murderous skeleton was not exactly something that could be accomplished easily. And normally, there would be no reason to. After all, it was not like turning one of the deathless into a memory would give Sunny control over it. It would only allow him to dismiss and summon the skeleton like he would a memory, and nothing more. Once the deathless was summoned back, it would immediately attack Sunny once again. It would probably destroy the spell weave rooted inside of its bones, as well. But, to hell with it. I am going to try. Sunny was already in quite a desperate situation, and he neither wanted nor planned to control the Archon. All he wanted to do was get rid of him so that the Shadow Legion could escape, and Sunny himself could survive. He was sure, almost sure that if he did manage to dismantle the deathless spirit and draw him into his soul sea, the thing was not going to destroy his soul from within. That was because, unlike shades and shadows, a memory was not an actual thing when dismissed, not the items it became when summoned. Rather, it was an idea of that thing, a blueprint used to reassemble it from essence. So, the Archon would cease to exist as a thing within Sunny's soul sea. Most likely. I guess we'll see. Steeling himself, Sunny sent one of his incarnations away from the wolf and summoned two things. One was Weaver's Needle, and the other was a sacred soul shard stored in the replica of the Nameless Temple. Sacred shards were not at all simple to come by. Sunny had procured a few in Ariel's game, and a few more were unearthed by the forces of the human domain here and there in the dream realm. However, most of them were gone now. he had used some to survive the death game, while the rest became anchors for the defensive arrays he and Cassie created to protect key citadels of humanity. The one Sunny summoned was the last in his possession. Now, how the hell do I even do it? As 6 incarnations of Sunny were empowering the wolf in its battle against the Archon, his battered soul drowning in agony, he tried to calm himself down and think things through clearly. Come on, come on. The deathless spirit's staff brushed across a tall white dune no more than a few hundred meters away from him, erasing it from existence and making Ariel's hell shudder. Sunny crouched low to maintain his balance and gritted his teeth. In theory, it was simple. Weaving took a lot of time and concentration, so it was not something that could be done in the midst of a battle, at least not by him, and he was the best and only weaver in existence. Memories could not be woven or unraveled on the fly. But that only held true for proper memories. A rudimentary one, no different from the very first one Sunny had ever created, could be created quite easily. All he had to do was weave the fundamental enchantments that the nightmare spell used as the basis of all memories, and then connect them to the item that was supposed to become a memory. No, not even all of the rudimentary enchantments. Sunny did not care if the Archon could passively mend himself while stored in his soul. In fact, he would very much prefer if the damn Deathless couldn't. He did not need the memory of the wandering Archon to possess a title and a description, either. All he needed was to imbue that thing with the quality that allowed it to be dismissed or summoned, as well as make himself the being in control of when that happened. So, first of all, he needed to weave strings out of shadow essence. He needed to anchor them in the sacred shard and create the rudimentary enchantment of summoning. Then, he somehow needed to embed the shard and the weave into the Archon. While staying alive, no less. Well, as alive as someone who was technically dead could be. Single quote. Nothing to it. Smiling weakly, Sunny began weaving ethereal black strings out of his essence. Usually, he would weave a considerable length of the shadow string before beginning to weave it into a sorceress pattern. But right now, there was no time for that. So, Sunny wove faster than he had ever before, his 6 hands moving in rapid harmony. As soon as there was any length of the string at all, he immediately threaded it through Weaver's needle and anchored it in the soul shard, then continued to create more while beginning to shape the familiar pattern of the summoning enchantment. Sunny had created this particular pattern so many times that he could weave it with his eyes closed. Weaving it while simultaneously battling a deity, though, was proving to be a challenge. Most of Sunny's mind was preoccupied with the battle. He assisted the wolf while at the same time straining all of his being to resist the boundless will of the Archon, that was already almost beyond his limit, so he hardly had mental capacity for weaving as well. And yet, he had to manage somehow. So, he did. 2,896 to work. Luckily, the wolf was a lethal and ferocious being even without Sunny's direct control. In fact, if Sunny attempted to issue the sacred shade commands to tell it how to fight, he would only be getting in the way. The wolf had more battle experience than he did, was a better hunter than he was, and understood its own capabilities better than Sunny could ever hope to understand them. The Archon was too fast, too strong, and too beyond the scope of normal understanding for Sunny to be in his element while fighting it, anyway. The laws of existence were bending and twisting around the deathless spirit, rejecting the very notion of common logic. Time, space, and even causality had become unreliable at best, making the Archon immensely deadly and unpredictable. One moment, he was taking an unhurried step. A split second later, he was already upon the wolf, raising his terrifying staff to crush the sacred beast beneath it. At times, his blows arrived before they were delivered. Time itself hastened or slowed down, or even seemed to flow in reverse on occasion. Sunny was rattled. Luckily, the wolf was not. It did not try to understand or predict the Archon and the results of his actions. Instead, it acted on pure instinct, reacting faster than Sunny could even realize what was happening. At the same time, the wolf was calculating and cunning, steadily evading the deathless spirit while never letting him get distracted and turn his attention to the distant Shadow Legion. With Sunny's augmentation and assistance, the shadow of the wolf was putting up an admirable fight against the Archon. It was so fearless and ferocious, in fact, that Sunny imagined that if it had been any other cursed or sacred beast, they would have stood a good chance of defeating it. The wolf would have long torn the creature's throat open and feasted on its flesh. However, the sacred being they faced today was deathless, and so, no matter how ferocious and fearsome the wolf was, all it could do was endure as its body was slowly being broken and mutilated. And Sunny, meanwhile, endured his soul being torn to shreds. Arg! The weaver's needle trembled in his fingers. He was not in good shape. None of his cores had crumbled yet, but they were all full of cracks, almost on the verge of being broken. The silent waters of his soul sea were undulating restlessly, while the replicas of the two citadels he controlled were quaking, fissures slowly climbing up their walls. It hurt like hell, of course. Just need to hold on, a little more. The Shadow Legion was far in the distance by then, almost gone behind the horizon. Nef's fierce flames, which had illuminated the entire desert, were now a distant halo. The dawn was not yet near, but Sunny figured that he was perhaps halfway there. He had really managed to buy a lot of time, but sadly, not enough of it. And he did not think that he could endure 10 more minutes, let alone a few more hours. Not without losing a few of his cores, at least, and therefore a few of his shadows. Who would it be? The youngest of the 7, Lazy? Or maybe their eldest, gloomy sibling? Or perhaps both, and more? Sunny gritted his teeth. Like hell. The weave was slowly taking shape beneath his needle, tortuously slowly, compared to how familiar it was. It was funny, really. Usually, Sunny did not even pay attention to this part of the weaving process. He wove the rudimentary patterns almost unconsciously, relying on experience and muscle memory. But now, this simple weave seemed as difficult and impossible to master as it had once, a long time ago, when he attempted sorcery for the first time. Back then, he was in a cage in the Red Colosseum, waiting for an overwhelmingly, terrifyingly powerful adversary, an ascended zealot, to come and kill him. Now, he was in literal hell, fighting a fallen god. Sunny wasn't sure if one could call that a successful career. Get in shape, damn it. The wolf, and Sunny's soul, endured another blow. The giant beast fell to the sand, gray smoker pouring like a waterfall from its maw, while Sunny's hand trembled. As a result, the pattern he had almost completed came close to coming undone. Snarling, he ducked to let a piece of shrapnel moving at supersonic speed flash just above his head and grabbed the unraveling THRE adze with one of his hands. If not for the flesh weave, he would have lost his fingers right there and then. But, luckily, his body had been altered to excel at weaving, as were his spirit, mind, and soul, for that matter. So, Sunny managed to keep the pattern together. It was almost finished by then, requiring only the smallest touches. Catching Weaver's needle with his teeth, Sunny used all 6 of his hands to finish the pattern, and even though his very being was swaying and reeling from the pressure of having to battle a sacred being's will, he finally managed to complete the familiar spell weave. Sunny let out a tired sigh, holding the radiant soul shard in his fist. Then, he turned to look at the towering figure of the Archon. Great. Now, the worst part. He had to embed the soul shard and the spell weave anchored to it into the deathless spirit. How was he supposed to do that? The wolf had barely managed to rise when another devastating blow threw it to the ground once more. Sunny felt his vision darkening and swayed, failing to suppress a tortured groan from escaping his lips. Damn it, crap, curse it all. He straightened with another groan and turned to look in the direction of the tomb of Ariel. The Shadow Legion had finally disappeared behind the horizon, and Nef's radiance was like a distant, pale line above it. Sunny was surrounded by darkness. He inhaled deeply. Fine then, let's do it, no point in dilly-dallying. With that, he looked at the Archon once more and stepped into the shadows. When Sunny emerged from them, he was standing directly on the shoulder of the deathless spirit. He was quite high above the desert, and the howling winds immediately crashed into him, straining to throw him down. The ivory fabric of the Archon's tattered robe was like a soft carpet beneath his feet. The ancient horror's skull was like a hill in front of him, and the golden crown set into the black bone was like a tall ridge. Naturally, only a complete fool would climb the body of a malevolent god. Standing on the shoulder of the Archon, Sunny was more or less surrendering himself to death. He could be squashed into a bloody puddle in an instant, or killed in a million other ways. The black skull turned slowly, too, huge discs of gold staring at him like eyes. From that distance, Sunny could vaguely see the images etched into them, but because of the eerie radiance spilling from within the Archon's skull, he couldn't quite make out what those images showed. He wasn't sure that it would be wise to see them. The Archon's terrifying gaze descended upon him like an avalanche, making every wound on his body scream in pain, and every crack on his battered soul widened a little. Sunny forced out a smile. Hey, bastard, what gave you the courage to bully my wolf? The Archon stared at him silently, his dislocated jaw hanging in a twisted grin. Then, he slowly raised a hand, as if intending to squish Sunny like an annoying fly. Sunny lunged forward, rushing toward the base of the deathless spirit's spine. Far below, the wolf growled and leapt into the air, abandoning caution to weigh the fallen deity's arm down. It was sent crashing into the ground by an inexplicable blow that came before the Archon moved his skeleton hand to deliver it, slowly crumbling into a torrent of shadows, but that bought Sunny time. As his 6 shadows appeared on the white sand, having been robbed of the shade they had been augmenting, he reached the spine of the deathless spirit and thrust the soul shard at it, through it. And then, he did what he usually did when turning objects into memories. Using Weaver's needle, he attached the pattern to the unseen layer of the Archon's being, therefore connecting the two together. Bonding them. Did it work? The skeletal hand was already barreling toward him, obscuring the sky. At that moment, Sunny heard a voice. His own voice. It was the handy bracelet speaking. You have received a memory. Sunny was at best a heartbeat away from being destroyed. Dismiss. He was so panicked that he shouted the mental command out loud. In the next second, Sunny fell into a hurricane of white sparks, plummeting toward the white dunes. The shoulder of the deathless spirit, which had supported his weight, was not there anymore. Instead, a vast storm of essence sparks was pouring into his mangled soul. 2897 ad hoc memorization. Sunny fell through the hurricane of ethereal sparks and hit the sand with enough force to send a cloud of it into the air. The resounding thump of his landing was quite jarring, but he was not in the state to pay it any attention. Ouch! He rolled onto his back with a groan. Above him, the blinding storm of essence sparks was obscuring the world. The sparks flowed in powerful torrents, twisting as they plummeted down, toward him. Into him, the colossal whirlwind of essence was entering his soul, and all he could do was stare at it in a daze. He had actually succeeded. I can't believe that it actually worked. Sunny drew a shaky, hoarse breath. Then, he exhaled slowly. But it did. It really had. Back there in the heat of the moment, Sunny had been desperate and daring enough to believe that it would, and because he needed it too, he unleashed his will to make sure that it did. It seemed that his insane idea had already been in accordance with the laws of existence, or at least close enough to how they were supposed to work for his supreme will to make up for the difference. And now, he had a deathless spirit as a memory, safely stored in his soul sea. Well, the safely part still remained to be seen. Sunny could not do anything with that memory, but the mere fact that the Archon had been memorized meant that he wasn't here anymore, and that was already a life-saving boon. Not only did it mean that Sunny did not have to have his soul cores shattered, but the will of the deathless spirit was not affecting this corner of the hell of Ariel anymore, which meant that Nephis and the Shadow Legion would have an easier time battling the undead horde. And speaking of the undead horde, the vast storm of essence sparks was finally beginning to thin out, most of it having already rushed into Sunny's chest. He could finally see what was happening around him, and what he saw made him let out a stifled curse. The battle was not over with the disappearance of the Archon, it was merely returning to being simply terrifying again, as opposed to completely unreasonable. The wolf had been vanquished back to his soul, so Sunny was alone, surrounded by countless deathless. They had stayed away during his battle against the Archon, but now, the undead warriors of Ariel's hell were starting to pay him attention again. His other 6 incarnations had crumbled. Sunny had been so out of his mind due to the pain and the sheer lunacy of what he was attempting to do that he failed to maintain his avatars, so they reverted to being simple shadows once more. Now, these shadows gathered around him, looking at his battered figure with concern. They did not look that well, either. Each had been born from and innately connected to one of his cores, after all, so they had come very close to becoming homeless, and most likely to being destroyed. Sunny forced out a weak smile. What are you looking at, fools? The shadows glanced at each other. The happy shadow was just happy to be alive. The creepy shadow seemed fascinated by the idea of collecting malevolent undead as trophies. The haughty shadow could not believe that Sunny was so pathetic as to get them in that state, while the naughty shadow did not even care, staring in the direction where Nephis and the Shadow Legion had gone instead. The crazy shadow was mad. The lazy shadow could not be bothered to show a reaction, seemingly bored. As for the original invaluable helper, the gloomy shadow, it did not get a say because Sunny was currently using it to manifest himself. He could just imagine the exasperated EUE roll, though. Maybe a slow, mocking round of applause. He sighed and slowly got to his feet. Come, help me up. The shadows wrapped themselves around him, and he instantly felt better, stronger. Sunny had little time before the deathless descended upon him like an avalanche, so he briefly assessed his state. It was, in one word, terrible. His soul sustained so much damage that it would have long collapsed if not for Soul Weave. His cores were covered in cracks. His soul sea was turbulent and restless, and there, high above, an enormous sphere of light was orbiting the 7 battered black suns. That was the Archon, or at least a disassembled version of him. When Sunny stared at the radiant sphere, he felt a chill run down his spine. He did not sense any kind of consciousness or will in the memory, but it did have a presence. And that presence was full of malice. As he watched, a small spark of light separated itself from the sphere and drifted upward, dissipating after a few moments. Sunny shuddered. The memory of Archon wanted to be summoned, it seemed. Of course, Sunny had no intention of doing that. If he had a choice in the matter, the damn thing would never see the light of day again, but, at the same time, it felt like there was now a ticking time bomb in his soul. Who knew when that bomb was going to go off? I'll probably have to travel to Shadow Realm, summon the bastard there, and run away as fast as I can. But for now, he needed to run away as fast as he could from other Deathless, not the sacred horror he had imprisoned in his soul. Sunny grimaced from the appalling pain that permeated his entire being and glanced at the undead warriors, who were already rushing at him like a tide. Then, he took a step back and turned into a shadow, fleeing across the dunes from the Deathless horde. He was a decent enough fighter and a proficient sorcerer. But if there was one thing Sunny was really good at, it was running away. He caught up with Nephis and Azarax just before dawn. As the sun rose above Ariel's hell, the Deathless stopped their relentless onslaught and retreated, burrowing into sand. The undead following Azarax did, as well. The battered soldiers of the Shadow Legion were motionless, standing among the dunes in eerie silence. Sunny rose from the shadows and walked the rest of the distance in the pale radiance of early dawn. He looked around, searching for his shadows. Saint's armor was dented and broken, her jade skin visible through the breaches. Slayer was nursing a few wounds of her own, even if her countenance was as cold and menacing as ever. Serpent had coiled itself and hid its head, towering above the desert like a mountain of onyx scales. Sunny saw Azarax, as well. The ancient tyrant was sitting on the ground with his head lowered. As rays of sunlight fell on his mighty form, he moved slightly and burrowed his hand into the sand, staring at it absent-mindedly in subdued silence. Finally, Sunny's gaze fell on Nephis. She had regained her human form and was now sitting on the sand, watching the sun rise. Her face was calm and devoid of all emotions, her humanity having been burned away by the ferocious white flame. This was the first time Nephis had fully unleashed her aspect after losing the connection to most of the Longing domain, so Sunny was a little concerned about her. Groaning and grimacing, he limped toward Nephis and sat down nearby. "Are you all right?" She turned her head and studied him silently, then gave him an indifferent nod. Raising her hands, Nephis pulled Sunny to lie on her lap and placed them on his chest. Her skin ignited with a soft radiance, and he felt her flames seep into his soul, mending it and washing away the pain. Sunny let out a relieved sigh. He was dead tired, and the soothing warmth made him feel sleepy. As he lay there, his head resting comfortably on Neph's lap, an annoying shadow fell on him. Opening his eyes, Sunny saw Azarax staring down at him with a grin. Well, that grin of his was eternal, and he could not get rid of it even if he wanted to. So, Sunny could not blame him for it. The ancient tyrant scoffed. Well, you really did survive a battle with the Archon, Shadow. Good job distracting him, and managing to escape him, as well. Sunny blinked slowly. Who said that I escaped from the Archon? Azarax tilted his skull. Would you be alive now otherwise? Tired and embraced by a blissful warmth, Sunny smiled lazily. No, I did not have to escape, because I wiped that thing out. There's no trace of it left in this desert anymore, not even a single bone. The Archon only exists as a memory now, so I suggest you forget about him. Azarax stared at him darkly. That can't be true. Sunny chuckled. Why, I didn't even need a weapon to deal with that guy, I did him in with a needle. In fact, I just told him something like, "You're dismissed." And poof, he exploded. Azarax scoffed. You're lying. Sunny simply shrugged. Nephis, meanwhile, brushed the hair away from his face and smiled faintly. He never lies. Her voice was calm and even. Azarax stared at them for a while, then shook his skull and walked away with angry steps. The sun was rising above Ariel's hell, a new day was beginning. The tomb of Ariel looked closer than it had ever before. But also insurmountably distant. 2898 malign and destructive. Rain walked across the ashen soil of the Ebony Island. It was strange. The island looked very much like the Ivory Island, but was also completely different. There was no emerald grass. No clear lake. No grove of ancient trees, and no bones of a dead dragon, either. Instead, there were ruins of mysterious structures buried in the ash, dark stone, and obsidian berths protruding into the chasm that separated the island from the rest of the Chained Isles. The pagoda itself was entirely black, as opposed to the pristine white of the ivory tower. In fact, it was so lustreless and black that its walls seemed to devour light, like a vertical rift in the fabric of the world. The 7 broken heavenly chains hanging from the stone slopes of the ivory island were nowhere to be seen, either. Instead, there were other chains, just as enormous and mighty, but new and shiny as opposed to ancient and weathered. These chains were quite mundane and had been forged in the subterranean smelting plants of NQSC. Then, they were delivered to the Chained Isles through a dream gate and used to connect the Ebony Tower to the rest of the flying islands in order to prevent them from gradually collapsing into the sky below. Now, the enormous alloy chains stretched over the vast chasm at the heart of the Chained Isles, drawn taut. The Ebony Island served as the nexus of the entire region, holding it up in the sky. Quite impressive. Rain could only vaguely imagine the amount of ingenuity, industrial might, and complex calculations that had gone into pulling the Ebony Island from beneath the sea of divine flames in the depths of the sky below, then turning it into the anchor of this fractured continent. It definitely took the efforts of numerous people, including a few saints and a supreme, to accomplish. And a bit of divine sorcery of the demon of destiny, as well. Humans might not have understood how it worked, but they seamlessly integrated it into their design nevertheless. The result looked no less magnificent and humbling than all the other impossible sights one could find in the dream realm, more so, even, considering what it represented. A flawless synthesis of ancient sorcery and modern engineering, as well as a brilliant example of what was possible when all kinds of different people, mundane and awakened, worked together to achieve a benign and constructive goal. It was an example of how the world was meant to be. But very rarely was. Rain, focus. Rain flinched and turned her gaze back to where Cassie was kneeling on the ground, painting runes on the stone surface of the Ebony Island with a brush. Sorry. She was here to serve as Cassie's eyes, so there was no time to gawk at the sights. With Rain focused on the runes, Cassie was able to continue. As her brush glided gracefully across the black stone, she spoke in a measured tone. This rune doesn't have a meaning, but it expresses denial or prohibition. Adding it to a phrase changes the meaning, while adding it to a word often creates an antonym, but not always. Synonyms and antonyms are a separate topic, so we will not get into them right now. Which was probably wise, because it was a topic completely alien to Rain. At the moment, Cassie was creating a defensive array to protect the Ebony Island from the siege she believed was inevitable, similar to those she and Sunny had created before to reinforce a few other citadels, but also different, since she could not rely on his expertise anymore. Rain and Cassie had been at it for several days already, and since Rain had nothing to do but stare in the right direction, Cassie decided to give her lessons on runic sorcery as she worked. Rain was soaking the knowledge like a sponge. There was a lot of overlap between shaping and runic sorcery. After all, the latter was based on the former. However, there were also enough differences to make the two completely different from each other. There were no synonyms in shaping, for example. Everything only had one name, and every name was absolute. So, there could be no names that had the same meaning. There were more differences than that, of course. In shaping, there were only the names and their medium, the shaper. Runic sorcery, on the other hand, involved much more. There were the runes themselves, which transcribed the names, and the sorcerer who drew them. There was the canvas on which the runes were drawn, the tool used to draw them, and even the medium that transferred the runes from the brush to the canvas, unless they were carved, in which case there wasn't. The runes themselves were far more complex than the names, too, and there was an art to expressing the names through either solitary runes or combinations of them. Not everyone could fathom the names, but everyone could learn the runes and transcribe an approximation of a name they were not equipped to know. It was like an entirely new universe, but since Rain was a gifted shaper, she took to the runic sorcery easily as well. It was actually far more fun than learning the names. Cassie was still talking. This rune describes space. However, there are countless runes that describe space in the runic language, all bearing a slightly different meaning. So, if you want to transcribe the true name of space, you need to list them all in order, if you aspire to achieve a good result, that is. Rain studied the stunning weave of runes for a few moments, then tilted her head. But what does that element of the array do? Cassie smiled faintly. Do you still have that scarf of yours? In case of emergency, she could see Rain's own runes, so she probably knew. So, she was only asking for the sake of being polite. After spending time with Cassie, Rain realized that the blind seer did a lot of things simply to make people feel comfortable in her presence. It was a habit born of necessity, both because of her disability and because people would have found it odd and disturbing to be around an oracle as powerful as she was otherwise. Rain raised a hand and touched the silk scarf wrapped around her neck and shoulders. "Sure, I do," Cassie nodded. "This is what I am trying to do. Sunny designed it to lock you in space in case the cloud veil above Godgrave broke unexpectedly. Actually, he used the same kind of enchantment later to defeat a cursed beast, Abundance. And now I am trying to create a derivative runic enchantment that accomplishes the same thing." Rain frowned. "You are trying to lock the Ebony Tower in space." Continuing to draw runes while pouring essence into the brush, Cassie shook her head. "No, I am trying to lock space around the Ebony Tower." She sighed and turned slightly, facing the vast chasm. "Mordred is putting on a brave face, but the Dreamspawn will push him back against the Hollow Mountains eventually. The mirror domain is simply not powerful enough to contend against the entirety of the human domain. Perhaps it would have been if given more time, but Mordred had attained supremacy less than a year ago. His domain is too young." Cassie shook her head. "The war will arrive here eventually. This is where Mordred will make his last stand, and you remember why we had to run away from the Ivory Island, don't you?" Rain nodded. "Because of the Night Garden." Cassie smiled. "No, not because of the Night Garden. It is because of the man commanding the Night Garden. His aspect allows him to manipulate space, so he is a walking nightmare for anyone planning to fight a defensive battle." She returned to drawing runes. "The Ebony Island is a natural fortress because it is surrounded by a vast ABUSS. If Nightwalker is allowed to twist the space around it however he wishes, that advantage will be gone. So, naturally, one of the functions of the defensive array I am creating is to reinforce space here and make it less malleable. Now, focus. This rune." Rain looked at the expanse of black stone where Cassie was drawing the runes and concentrated on listening. In the process, however, she couldn't help but look at Cassie herself. Her chest tightened. Cassie did not look that well. She seemed to have lost weight, and her skin was unhealthily pale. Worst of all, the left side of her blindfold was soaked in blood once again, red drops rolling down her cheek from time to time. She looked fragile. Rain gritted her teeth. It was all because of that man, Mordred. Every morning, Cassie entered his quarters, where she cleansed his memories of the plague. And every morning, she left with blood on her face, weaker than she had been the day before. It was because of the strain of using her transcendent ability despite missing an eye. But more than that, it was because of the strain of experiencing the memories of a sovereign. The Supremes were more than just humans, after all, and their minds were too vast for mortal people to fathom, and from what Rain was able to find out, Mordred of Nowhere was the most inhuman of the Supremes. Nephis felt the desire of countless people. Sunny shared his senses with his shades. The Dreamspawn was connected to his thralls somehow, as well, sharing in their thoughts and emotions. But the King of Nothing was different. He simply existed shattered across millions of vessels, each vessel representing an instance of his inhuman mind. So, that was what Cassie experienced every time she delved into his memories. She experienced being millions of beings at the same time. Needless to say, that demented kaleidoscope of perspectives put a tremendous burden on her own mind, which, albeit transcendent, was still human. And speaking of inhuman, Rain furtively looked up. Cassie was not the only one preparing the Ebony Island for a siege. 2899 Last battlefield. The King of Nothing was preparing, too. Only, unlike Cassie, he wasn't drawing runes on the black stone. Instead, he was simply bringing some of his vessels to the Ebony Island. Looking at them, Rain could not help but feel her stomach churn. Creepy, creepy, creepy. Mordred of Nowhere seemed like the most inhuman of the sovereigns for more than one reason. It was not just that his soul was split among millions of vessels, it was also that most of those vessels were not human. Instead, they were nightmare creatures. The Chained Island bordered the Hollow Mountains in the north and the Glass Hell in the west, so it was an important confluence point for the King of Nothing. It was also a gate leading south, across the regions of the Dream Realm conquered by the King of Swords decades ago, and over the Black Mountains, where the heartland of the Dream Realm lay. So, there was always a constant procession of ghastly abominations passing through the Ebony Island. Some came from the Hollow Mountains, while some came from Godgrave. The latter especially gave Rain chills, because she still vividly remembered watching too many of her comrades being torn apart and devoured by the hideous creatures of the Scarlet Jungle. The nightmarish vessels of the King of Nothing came to Chained Island through one of the mirror gates and left through another, traveling toward the Black Mountains, where a fierce battle was raging across countless peaks. They had rarely lingered before, but now, things were different. As Rain watched, a colossal abomination that resembled a hideous tick dragged its swollen belly across the ash. Numerous revolting shapes moving beneath its gray skin in a nauseating pattern. Reaching the edge of the island, it turned to face the ebony tower and fell to the ground heavily, burrowing all 8 of its segmented legs deep into the obsidian bedrock. A swarm of eerie, transparent abominations, Rain recognized them as the crystalline insects from the glass hell, followed, carrying heavy plates of forged metal. Moving with flawless precision, they began constructing an iron cradle around the gargantuan tick, as if wanting to protect it from threats coming from neighboring islands. Looking at it, Rain couldn't help but feel like she was watching a squad of army engineers build fortifications around a fixed artillery position. On the other side of the island, something that looked like a hill of long black hide was laying on the ground. There was a ghastly abomination hidden under the mountains of black hair, though, a thing that looked like a hybrid between a spider and an ape, its long limbs ending with enormous hands. A crowd of mundane humans was dismantling an ancient ruin near the monstrosity, all wearing the same absent expression. Dozens of them strained to move each enormous block of obsidian, piling them near the abomination. To Rain, it looked like soldiers preparing projectile ammunition for an enormous trebuchet. Some distance away, a swarm of nightmare creatures that resembled crystal wasps was spilling over the edge of the island like a glass river. They crawled down its inverted slopes and hid on its dark side, far away from where any One could see them. They were stealth aircraft deploying to protect the island from aerial attacks from the sky below. Somewhere else, a dozen horned beasts were pulling a massive shape covered in black fabric across the obsidian. Rain was almost sure that it was meant to serve as an air defense battery. Things like that were happening all across the Ebony Island. In a few areas, groups of small abominations were planting scarlet seeds into the ash. The same was happening on all islands surrounding the Ebony Tower. Crazy bastard, is he creating minefields out of the scarlet jungle? Rain was suddenly covered in cold sweat. That loathsome jungle was only contained by the incinerating skies above Godgrave. What was going to happen if someone brought it away from that white abyss? Would it consume all of the dream realm like an unstoppable tide? She shivered. Well, probably not. After all, the Scarlet Jungle had existed for thousands of years, but never moved past the arm bones of the dead god. So, perhaps the King of Nothing knew what he was doing, after all. Rain, stop staring at those things. Rain flinched again and hurriedly looked back at the runes. She hesitated for a few moments, and then sighed. The one in the basement is nice. The other one, though, is a bit of a horror show. Cassie smiled. He can hear you, you know. Rain coughed, then shrugged nonchalantly. Well, if he has manners, he'll pretend that he didn't. Cassie shook her head slightly and focused on drawing the runes. After a while, though, she said quietly. It was north of here, many years ago. When I first met Mordred. Her hand grew still, and she turned her head to face north, as if trying to see something in the distance. Now that was a horror show. It all ended with a battle between two saints. One of them died, and as a result of their clash, an entire island was destroyed. That is why there is only one citadel on the Chained Isles now, not two. With that, Cassie continued working on the defensive array and said somberly. I wonder what will happen when two supremes clash here, instead. Rain did not know how to answer. At the same time, inside the Ebony Tower, Mordred was leaning on a wall with his eyes closed. He was breaking the blockade on the River of Tears. At the same time, he was encircling Ravenheart. At the same time, he was battling vicious predators in Godgrave. At the same time, he was invading the Great Hive under the Glass Hell. At the same time, he was waging war on humanity in the Black Mountains. And much more. He was watching Song of the Fallen and the Princess of Shadows, too. Well, if he has manners, he'll pretend that he didn't. Still keeping his eyes closed, Mordred smiled. Cheeky girl. Finally opening them, he looked at the divine flames burning in the great brazier at the center of the dark hall. The white flames reflected in his mirror-like eyes, and for a few moments, it was as if white sparks were dancing in them. With a sigh, Mordred looked away from the flame and descended the stairs to the ground floor of the Ebony Tower. Then, he descended deeper, underground. Walking to the large mirror standing in the circular chamber, he looked at the reflection of himself sitting there on the floor. Mordred studied his other self for a while and then smiled. Made a little friend, did you? After a short pause, the part of him that was imprisoned in the mirror smiled. I did. Then again, I doubt I would have been able to befriend anyone unless you allowed it, so, thank you, brother. Mordred scoffed. It's just that I know how boring it is, being trapped in a mirror. You at least got a whole miniature realm to enjoy and explore, complete with windows to the outside world. All I had gotten was a stone cell. Look, compared to our father, am I not generous? Am I not merciful? The other part of him remained silent, then shrugged slightly. I couldn't say. I never really had the opportunity to get to know him, after all. From what I hear, though, anyone would seem generous and merciful compared to our father. Mordred laughed. That is true, as well. 2,900 Janus. Supreme Mordred stared at Saint Mordred, both of them reflecting in each other's eyes. One wore an expression of contempt, the other of wistful sympathy. One was the captor, and the other was the captive. Eventually, the captor said, "But you don't seem to hold it against him, do you?" He lingered for a few moments, and then smiled bitterly. You know, it's funny. What was it that she said? The one in the basement is nice, but the other one is a horror show. Of the two of us, you are the one people tend to perceive as the better version. But they all fail to realize that even if I am not nice, you are the real horror show between us. Mordred leaned forward, almost pressing his forehead against the mirror. I might not be entirely human, but you are barely a human, at best. You lack so much. You can't feel anything, not resentment, not anger, not hatred. Not the feeling of being hurt, not the feeling of being betrayed. Not even the painful shame of being discarded. Which one of us deserves to be called the king of nothing, really? He shook his head. People don't seem to understand that a person who is a friend to everyone is loyal to no one. Your nice act is simply a facade that hides how crippled and inhuman you are. You smile blissfully at that girl, the Princess of Shadows, but if the Dreamspawn was here, killing her, you'd smile blissfully at him too. His reflection sighed. You are probably right, but I like to think that I'd at least ask him to stop. Mordred looked at the reflection chillingly. And yet if he refused to listen and tortured her to death, you wouldn't hold it against him. You wouldn't be capable of holding it against him, so how can they look at you and see someone nice? He paused for a second and then smiled. Maybe it's because you are so blank that all they can see in you is a reflection of themselves. No one really understands how empty you are, so they simply project their own image of what a human should be on you. And since people love nothing more than themselves, you receive their sympathy. Must be nice. Mordred took a step back and laughed. Well, it's not like I need anyone's sympathy. And it's not like I would feel the inclination to do something if that girl was being tortured and killed in front of me, either, so I guess neither of us has that good of a claim on being human. Which is just as well. Who would want to be human, anyway? He grinned. In truth, I am only keeping the girl alive for two reasons. One is to have her as hostage in case I need to force Song of the Fallen to do something she doesn't want to do, or deter her from doing something that I don't want her to do. The witch knows to be on her best behavior unless she wants to see her little friend tortured, broken, and killed. His grin dimmed a little. The other reason is insurance in case the Lord of Shadows does come back. Until the Dreamspawn is dealt with, it's best to have a cordial relationship with that man, and I don't think that he'll take the death of his pretty pupil well. Having him throw a fit in the middle of a war against the Dreamspawn would be most problematic. The other Mordred studied the King of Nothing for a while, not saying anything. Eventually, though, he asked, "You don't usually feel the need to explain yourself to me. Why are you so talkative today, brother?" Mordred just stared at him, a subtle frown twisting his brow. Yes, indeed. Why am I so talkative today? His reflection sighed. It's because you are nervous, isn't it? You are. Mordred smiled. Why should I be nervous? I am having the time of my life. An all-consuming war against the entire world, with nothing impeding or constraining me. I am having a blast. You can't imagine how liberating it is, to finally be free of the need to pretend to be something I'm not. To be free of the need to reflect all those people back on themselves so that they'd see me as one of their own. He chuckled. You know, that thing that defined us and our entire despicable clan, the lineage of War God. I used to think that it was severely misunderstood. They went around giving us titles like the Prince of War, the Princess of War, the Sovereign of War. But War God was also the goddess of life, the deity of technology and progress. She was the patron deity of humanity, as well. Mordred shook his head. Our father and grandfather were praised and exalted as conquerors, as consummate warriors. But they were both craftsmen first, and fighters second. They were artificers who wielded utility aspects, they created things. So, I always thought that focusing solely on the war aspect of War God was misguided. He looked around and grinned. But now that I am waging absolute war against all of existence, I finally understand the allure. It feels natural to me. I like it, I am enjoying myself way more than I ever expected. I think it really is in our blood, war. Mordred looked at his counterpart and grimaced. Although someone as pathetic as you would never be able to understand it. The other Mordred studied him for a long while, contemplating something. Eventually, he asked quietly. You don't think you can win, do you? Mordred stared at his reflection for a few moments, expressionless. He scoffed. What are you talking about? Of course, I can win. I will win. You just wait and see. At the end of all this, I'll be more vast and powerful than ever, while the Dreamspawn will be broken and defeated, sealed in some hellhole he will never be able to escape. His reflection shook his head. No, you can't. The other Mordred looked up at his supreme self, seeing his own reflection in those mirror-like eyes. You cannot defeat that man, brother. You know you can't. He made us, after all. Everything we are was molded in his image. He knows everything there is to know about us, while we only know what he decided to show us. He is older, stronger, more knowledgeable. He has all of humanity fighting on his side, he has everything. But what do we have? We only have ourselves. And that is not enough to defeat everything. Mordred just stared at him silently. After a short while, his reflection added. So, why are you persisting in this madness? This is not like you, brother. Trying to destroy all of humanity was already monstrous enough, misguided enough, but you were too late. Now, it's too late. That man already made all of them conduits of his domain, so he is unstoppable now. You can't even steal people from his domain without becoming infected by the plague yourself. Don't you see that there is no way to win? Mordred remained silent for a few moments, then smiled crookedly. Who says that we only have ourselves? He looked up, as if trying to pierce the obsidian walls of the ebony tower with his gaze. I also have Song of the Fallen. She can cleanse my mind of the plague, which means that I still have a chance. Sure, the Dreamspawn cannot be destroyed as long as people remember him, but when there are no people, and I am the only one left, whose power will be greater? Whose will be more powerful? This war is far from being lost, brother. I'll find a way to win it. Wait and see. His other self slowly shook his head. Lady Cassia might be powerful and talented, and her aspect might be exactly what you need to prolong this war, but she is merely a saint. How much of the plague can she erase from the mind of a supreme? Enough to add a few vessels to your domain each day. A few hundred. How are you going to subjugate millions of awakened and billions of mundane people before the Dreamspawn comes to take your head? He sighed. I just don't understand why you are preparing for the decisive battle here, on the Chained Isles. Wasn't your plan to escape into the Hollow Mountains and lead a long guerrilla campaign against the Hunger Domain from the safety of the mist? What changed? The other Mordred lingered for a second and then asked with a hint of concern in his voice. Are you sure that Lady Cassia only erased those of your memories that were the source of the plague? Mordred studied him silently for a while, then smiled. Yes, I am quite sure. Do you think that I am more trusting than you? Of course, I've set countermeasures in place before letting her anywhere near my mind. He inhaled deeply, then looked his reflection in the eye. Sure, that was the plan. However, that plan became meaningless the moment Changing Star and the Lord of Shadows chose to disappear instead of serving as a foil for the Dreamspawn, at least for a while. Everything happened too swift without them. Besides, he lingered for a moment, then looked away. You probably won't get it, but there comes a time when a man must take a stand. For me, that second is now. Mordred looked around the circular chamber, then faced the mirror once again. You know, the first time I fought Morgan, I was quite afraid. After all, she had always been a bit of a scarecrow in my mind, someone who was more talented than me, more powerful than me, more favored than me. Someone who was more desirable than me, and for a good reason. A true heiress of war, forged into a perfect weapon by our father. He smiled bitterly, and indeed, when we finally crossed swords, I almost lost my life. I did lose a hand and an eye, actually, but in the end, I still won. I was able to win because I held nothing back, because unlike her, I didn't care about losing a hand and an eye, and more than that, I didn't care about staying alive. About staying free instead of ending up in another cage for countless years. All I cared about was winning that fight. His smile faded slowly, replaced by a cold, grim expression. So now that I am set to face the Dreamspawn in battle, to face my maker, how can I hope to win if I am holding something back? If I leave myself a path of retreat and plan for what happens if I lose, if I scheme to survive even if I am defeated, then I have already been defeated, don't you think? Mordred sighed and looked around, a pleasant smile finding its way back onto his lips. No. Whatever happens, it will happen here, on the Ebony Island. I am not running from this fight. I think it's quite fitting, actually, that everything will be decided on the Chained Isles. You wouldn't know, but I made a lot of memories here, a long time ago. Turning back to the mirror, he laughed. So I can't wait to make more. This time, they will be memories of war. 2901 Memories of War. The war between the Longing Domain, the Hunger Domain, and the Mirror Domain was over. The Longing Domain, which had seemed indomitable once, fell in just a few months, and now, only 2 warring factions remained. So, a new war was now unraveling under the patchwork sky of the Dream Realm. At the time Cassie and Rain arrived at the Ebony Island, Mordred was steadily pushing the forces of humanity back on all fronts. All the northern expanse of the Dream Realm, excluding only Ravenheart, already belonged to him. His seemingly endless vessels were moving like an unstoppable wave down the River of Tears, and in the east, the Black Mountains were poised to fall soon. It seemed like the King of Nothing was going to wash over the world like a tide, leaving nothing but death and desolation in his wake, leaving nothing but himself to rule the empty, devastated world. But reality was different. As soon as the last bastions of the Longing Domain, including the 4 great citadels, fell into the hands of the Dreamspawn, his rule over humanity was solidified. All of mankind now belonged to him, submitted to him, and worshipped him as their savior. Of course, that was not because everyone truly believed in Astarion. Instead, it was because everyone had been infected by the idea of him, enthralled by him, and no one could escape his frightening powers. But it was all the same, as far as the war against the King of Nothing was concerned. With all of humanity united in their eerie obedience to the Dreamspawn, the nature of the war changed. There was no internal conflict among the humans anymore, and they were guided by the terrible will of the eldest and most experienced of the Supremes, so, their unity and military cohesion increased by leaps and bounds, going far beyond what was humanly possible. And since Astarion ruled the most powerful domain in existence now, having grown far more powerful than any other Supreme as a result, he did not feel the need to shy away from the battlefield anymore. On the contrary, he led his thralls into battles quite often, as if taunting the King of Nothing to bring his most powerful vessels and face him. But, of course, there was no difference between those vessels that were powerful and those that were weak. In the end, they were all Mordred, and so, Astarion could assault Mordred's mind every time he found himself close to any vessel. He could slowly poison Mordred's mind from any distance, as well, but being face to face allowed the Dreamspawn to unleash the full extent of his insidious aspect upon the King of Nothing. It wasn't easy to infect the mind of a Supreme, especially the mind of Mordred, who had the capacity to control millions of vessels without going mad, or at least more mad than he already was. His mind was vast and eerily alien, but then again, Astarion was not entirely human either. Just like rivers cut rock, his insidious powers slowly chipped away at the King of Nothing, poisoning his mind drop by drop. That should have destroyed Mordred, eventually, but even in the short term, Astarion's influence was supposed to diminish his ability to fight against the Hunger Domain effectively. That did not happen, though. It did not happen for one simple reason, because of Lady Cassia, Song of the Fallen. She, who was now considered a traitor of humanity by those who had fallen under the Dreamspawn's hex, seemed to be the only reason why Mordred could resist the powers of Lord Astarion so persistently. So, people blamed Song of the Fallen for every person who died in the war against the Mirror Domain, and for every soul that was destroyed to give its sinister ruler a new vessel. Despite the fact that the King of Nothing had found himself a witch to protect himself from the insidious power of the Dreamspawn, the tides of war still changed against him. In the west, the warriors of humanity managed to build an effective blockade on the River of Tears. Of course, Mordred could bypass it by using the surface of the river itself as an exit of the Mirror Gate, but in doing so, he would be committing a large contingent of his forces to a battle behind enemy lines. And with the Song sisters leading a counter-offensive from Ravenheart, pushing eastward toward Godgrave, he had no choice but to conserve his vessels and pull them back to the Moonriver Plains. In the east, his advance across the Black Mountains slowed down at first and then came to a halt. That was where the fighting was the most fearsome, and that was where the Dreamspawn appeared in the flesh most often. Mordred's conquest had come against the wall he couldn't overcome. For a while, the two domains were at a stalemate, fighting fierce battles across the jagged peaks of the Black Mountains. And then, humanity managed to push the King of Nothing back. He lost control over a single peak at first, then of a few more. And then, the Black Mountains campaign saw a complete reversal. The forces of humanity had been desperately clinging to the snowy slopes before, being chased further and further south almost every day, but now, it was the other way around, and it was the vessels of the King of Nothing who lost ground each day. Mordred was being pushed north. He was losing vessels faster than he could procure new ones in Godgrave, the Glass Hell, and across the battlefronts of the war against humanity. And while he could face Astarion in battle and wound him, or even destroy his body, the Dreamspawn could not really be destroyed, not unless the idea of him was erased from existence. So, no matter how many wounds he received, how severely his body was bruised and mangled, he always returned to how he was before, smiling as his golden eyes shone with amusement. The fierce fighting went on for weeks, reshaping the very terrain of the Dream Realm. In the Black Mountains, countless peaks had collapsed, burying the deep gorges with rock. New mountain passes were created, and the old ones were erased from existence. The veil of snow covering the tallest mountains was incinerated, and the ancient glaciers melted under intense heat. The rivers running from the vast mountain chain overflowed, drowning swaths of land on the plains below. New lakes were created, while the old ones grew still and shallow. The nightmare creatures who dwelled in the wilderness found their lairs being disturbed or destroyed entirely, so a widespread migration began, threatening the Citadel cities all the way down to Bastion. In the west, the destruction was more widespread due to the scale of the natural forces involved in the calamity. The fearsome battles on the River of Tears caused it to change course, forming a new riverbed as several sections of the old one were cut off from the current. The cataclysm caused by the change of the Great River was devastating beyond description. A titanic, obliterating flood swallowed entire plains, washed away vast forests, and drowned flourishing valleys, destroying countless ecosystems completely. Before the new riverbed stabilized, entire regions of the Dream Realm found themselves underwater, their landscape changed forever. In the end, the new riverbed was formed, flowing almost in a straight line for long stretches on its way to the Stormsia. At the same time, several colossal oxbow lakes appeared in places where its currents used to twist and turn. The sections of the dried riverbed revealed secrets and horrors that no one could even imagine before, but at the moment, no one had time to pay them any attention, either, too busy either surviving or fighting the war. And after these weeks of vicious fighting and all the devastation the new domain war visited upon the Dream Realm, the King of Nothing was not locked in a stalemate against the Dreamspawn anymore. He was retreating. The combined forces of humanity, nurtured to their current daunting strength by changing star of the immortal flame and led by the Dreamspawn, had turned out too numerous and too powerful for his young domain to contend against. So, in an attempt to consolidate his forces and prevent too many vessels from being destroyed while they were spread thin, Mordred was forced to narrow the scope of what he was trying to hold on to. He abandoned the basin of the River of Tears first, then reluctantly retreated from the Black Mountains. The Moonriver Plains fell into the hands of humanity once again after that, followed by several regions north of the mountains, and once he lost the citadels there, the advantage Astarion had managed to gain became even more overwhelming. Mordred attempted to hold on to Godgrave, but it was of no use, or, rather, it was too costly. So, instead of fighting another war in Godgrave, he chose to pull back. Everyone expected him to retreat toward the Hollow Mountains, but instead, he retreated east. The Glass Hell was conquered by humanity soon after that, as well as the remaining regions north of the Hollow Mountains. Soon enough, only the Chained Isles remained. 2,902 enemy at the gate. Cassie surfaced from Mordred's memories with a gasp. Recoiling from him, she fell to the floor and strained to draw air into her lungs. She was disoriented and nauseous, hoarse breaths escaping from between her lips as she suffered a powerful vertigo. Funnily enough, it was the pain that helped her overcome the feeling of being disconnected from the world and rooted her to reality once more. A dreadful, piercing pain was pulsing in her empty socket, and blood was flowing down her pale face. Raising a shaking hand, Cassie wiped the blood away with a handkerchief and pulled her blindfold in place, hiding her wound from the world. "Why are you wearing that?" Mordred's voice betrayed a hint of curiosity. "The blindfold, I mean. From what I can see, it brings little to no benefit." Cassie finally managed to get her breathing under control. She remained silent for a moment, then said in a subdued tone. No reason. Mordred did not seem convinced. He studied her before asking with interest. Is it your aspect legacy? Cassie shook her head. I have no aspect legacy. He chuckled. What a coincidence. Me neither. Mordred rose from where he sat and stretched his shoulders. Curious things, those aspect legacies. The aspect does not come from the spell, but the legacy does. There is a set way to unseal it, as well, one only the spell knows about. I do wonder sometimes why it has never granted me mine. He chuckled. Perhaps it's because I was destined to inherit nothing. Cassie remained silent for a moment, then said quietly. This blindfold is just a mundane memory. Its enchantment is of no use, but it cleans and repairs itself, and I like the color. That is already good enough. More importantly, it puts people at ease, so that is why I wear it. Mordred seemed to give her a long look. There are hardly any people here. Letting out a sigh, Cassie slowly rose to her feet. Perhaps not, but over the years, wearing this blindfold became a habit. I like it. Every time I put it on, I feel like I am putting on a helmet and lowering its visor. And then, I am ready for battle. She turned to face him and raised her chin slightly. Are you ready for battle? Mordred laughed. Giving her a pleasant smile, he turned away and headed for the door. You should know it by now, Cassia. I have never not been in a battle. I am a descendant of the goddess of life, after all. Leaving the chamber, he added in a placid tone. And life is war. ... At the same time as Mordred was looking at the bloodied face of Cassia, who was kneeling on the floor, he was standing on the last link of an immense chain that connected the southern island to the lands beyond. The corpse of Saint Dar of the Maharana had been destroyed some time ago, so now, he was wearing a different vessel. Behind him, a battered procession of his other selves was retreating up the great length of the anchor chain, and in front of him. Well, he couldn't see the victorious army of the Hunger Domain yet, but it was not too far. He watched the endless columns of awakened march across the wilderness through the reflections. They had already reclaimed all the citadels between the decimated Black Mountains and the Chained Isles, and were now aiming to take sanctuary of Noctis before the end of the week. In fact, the scouts of the White Feather clan were already observing it from the depths of the sky below. In the west, Godgrave had already been reclaimed by the forces of humanity. The Glass Hell now belonged to the Dreamspawn, as well, with a new saint ruling over the desolate streets of Red Hill. Humans even conquered the second citadel, which Mordred had discovered in the depths of the hive. He did not even get the chance to explore it fully. One army was approaching the southern anchor chain, while another was nearing the western. Before too long, they would pass the ruins of the Red Colosseum and disturb the peace of the Altar Island, where the ancient statue of War God still stood. Mordred wondered if losing the Altar of War, somewhat of an ancestral holy place, for him, meant anything. It probably didn't, but the symbolism was quite poignant. In any case, the two armies would fuse into one great one, the greatest army humanity had ever fielded, as they met on the doorsteps of the Ebony Island. There, he would build a true monument to war. Your little rebellion seems to have failed, hasn't it? The insidious voice flowed into his ears, and as if by magic, a man with golden eyes was suddenly standing in front of the chain's anchor, looking at him calmly. Astarion smiled. I've heard that children eventually go through a phase when they rebel against their parents, but aren't you too old for that, boy? Mordred sighed. I think I know now what you had been up to for all those years, stuck on the moon. You were polishing your taunting skills, weren't you? If so, congratulations. Your ability to anger others is beyond compare, even old Jest would be envious. Astarion shrugged. You look tired, Mordred. Mordred chuckled. Tired? Indeed, I am a little tired. How many times have I destroyed that body of yours? And yet, you are still here, in front of me. What a tiresome man you are. The Dreamspawn studied him for a few moments. Destroying your endless vessels is also quite a boring affair. But enough is enough. How about you finally see reason, boy? Cease this senseless resistance. You know you can't win, so surrender peacefully. Taking a step forward, he said amicably. The rest of them, humans, are nothing but fodder. But you and I are different. We can rule this world together, face all its dangers together. We can become gods together, and even something greater than that. All you have to do is submit. Mordred could not help but laugh. Submit? Become one of your thralls? You must be mad. The smile slowly drained from his face, replaced by a chilling lack of emotion. You didn't even bother to come up with a believable lie this time, huh? Well, no matter. Listen closely, Dreamspawn. Mordred stared down at Astarion and spoke evenly. I would rather die than submit to you. Oh, but I won't die. Long after your name is lost and forgotten, the name of Mordred of Nowhere will be spoken far and wide, known to everyone. He grinned. Well, that's because it will be me. I will be everyone, and you will be no one. Mordred inhaled deeply. And, actually, I lied. Destroying you over and over again was not tiresome at all. In truth, I enjoyed it greatly. I hoped that it would never end. But sadly, everything has to have a conclusion, including you. Including me. With that, he took a step back and gave Astarion a mocking bow. So I will see you soon. And I will be the last thing you ever see. With that, he disappeared. Some time after their conversation concluded, the armies of the Hunger Domain walked across the celestial chains and entered the Chained Isles. During their crossing, the warriors of the White Feather clan rose from the sky below and reclaimed the sanctuary of Noctis. It stood empty, protected by no one. And while that was happening, Cassie descended the steps to the underground level of the Ebony Tower and stood in front of the mirror there, facing the man trapped inside. The hidden flaw of the King of Nothing. 2903 to see, to know, to remember. The other Mordred, one that was far nicer, safer, and more hollow, glanced at Cassie with a hint of surprise in his mirror-like eyes. Or at least that was what Cassie imagined when she heard his voice. She couldn't place a mark on him, after all, so all that faced her was endless darkness. Lady Cassia, it is nice to make your acquaintance. Cassie felt like she knew him very well, but she still nodded. Yes, likewise. She lingered for a moment and then said in a neutral tone. I wanted to thank you for keeping Rain company these last few, however long it has been since we arrived. She doesn't show it, but you must know how awfully lonely, anxious, and afraid she is. The other Mordred must have nodded. Yes, naturally. Those feelings. I know them well myself. A pale smile appeared on Cassie's lips. Really? Because I am not sure that I even know what feelings are anymore. She inhaled deeply, then sighed. I guess with everything coming to an end, one way or another, I wanted to have a conversation with somebody as well. Mordred remained silent for a long while. Am I the only option? Cassie smiled. Perhaps he was right about you. About people feeling nice in your company because all they see in you is a reflection of themselves. But what to do? I cannot even see. I wouldn't recognize my own reflection even if I were standing right in front of it. She raised a hand to wipe a drop of blood from her cheek, then lingered for a moment. I get it now, I think. Why Kisong wanted to explain herself to me. There is a kind of solace in being witnessed just before the end. Mordred, this Mordred, would not know the context. But he seemed to have still understood what she meant, or possibly even what she felt. And you want to be witnessed, by me? A bittersweet smile twisted Cassie's lips. No, far from it. To be honest, I'd rather be forgotten altogether. I do not want your solace. Solace is a sin, anyway. Coming from the darkness, his disembodied voice was hiding a hint of surprise now. Then what do you want from me, Lady Cassia? She pretended to look around. Who knows, maybe I am simply here to see if there is a way to kill you, somehow, in case I need to get rid of the King of Nothing in a hurry. He chuckled. I'm not actually here, so that would be a challenge. Besides, you must know that he is watching your every move and listening to your every word. Is it really wise to say these things aloud? Cassie shrugged. What can he do? He needs me. She remained silent for a moment, then added. Yes, I know that he is watching me closely, and that nothing escapes him. It would be quite difficult indeed, to do something that goes against his will. The other Mordred asked. But why would you want to kill him, anyway? I thought that you were allies. Cassie smiled faintly. We were allies. I needed him as well, you see, to buy time for Changing Star and the Lord of Shadows. That time is running out now, so he is of no use to me anymore. On the contrary, by all accounts, it won't do me any good if he does too well in the final battle. What if he wipes out half of all awakened? She shook her head. At this point, it would be better if he suffered a swift and overwhelming defeat. More people will survive that way for longer. At least, a drawn-out battle is the worst possible outcome. So, I might betray him after all. There was a long stretch of silence, and then the other Mordred said. I don't think that you will, though. Cassie raised an eyebrow. Why is that? I am known to be a traitor. He seemed to consider his words for a while before answering. I'm not sure. My brother is certainly wary of you, but you don't seem like the devious, eerie, treacherous witch he described. She smiled. What do I seem like, then? The other Mordred seemed to smile back. You seem like you're trying your best. Hearing that, Cassie couldn't help but laugh. When her laughter died down, she fell silent for a few moments and then said in a neutral tone. To be honest, I am a bit devious. And I'm a bit eerie. Treacherous, that too, I think. I just hide it better than most, possibly better than anyone. She paused, then added. But I am really trying my best. Mordred studied her carefully and sighed. Someone told me recently that there comes a time when one must take a stand. I feel like you are at a point when you are ready to take yours, as well. So, I don't think that you'll betray my brother, even if it benefits you. And no matter how much you hate him. Cassie reached forward and touched the mirror, tracing its frame with her fingers. Hate him? I never hated him. She drew her hand back. Was appalled by him? Yes. Was terrified by him? Yes. But hating him, it would have been hypocritical of me, considering all the things that I've done. She remained silent for a few moments and then added. It's difficult to hate someone whom you understand, and in this whole wide world, I might be the only person who understands Mordred. Because I've seen his memories, most of them, at least. I experienced all the things he had experienced, and saw every step he took to end up where he is to you, what he is to you. I witnessed him. Cassie smiled weakly. I am still appalled by him, but I don't think I will ever be able to hate him, or you. After all, the two of you come from the same source. The most important memories I saw are yours, as well. She sighed deeply. So even if we are meeting for the first time, I can't treat you as a stranger. Mordred did not say anything, and all that met her was the darkness, as well as the feeling of the cold surface of the mirror under her fingers. Cassie raised a hand and pulled down her blindfold, revealing her empty, bleeding eye socket. That is the real reason why I came to talk to you, Mordred, the other Mordred. The lesser Mordred. He smiled bitterly. The lesser Mordred, well, I can't argue with that. But what exactly do you mean, Lady Cassia? She lingered with the answer. In the end, she shrugged. I lost the ability to see the future. But I can still predict it, even if I use deduction instead of precognition now. So, call it a contingency, of sorts. He seemed to have frowned. I still don't understand what you are talking about. Cassie raised an eyebrow. Don't you? The two of you used to be the same person, but your paths have diverged at some point. Since then, you were both locked in your own cell of solitude, each suffering his own banishment. Neither of you is whole, and while he detests you, you long for him, don't you? Just like you longed for your family, whose care and affection you had been denied. Mordred laughed bitterly. Oh, but he longs for me, as well. He longs to destroy and absorb me, like he did the rest, it's just that he can't, because I carry his death. Quite a pair, aren't we? Cassie shook her head. It doesn't matter what he wants. I've spent so many days and suffered so much doing what he wanted, what he needed from me. What do you want? Mordred remained silent, so she spoke instead. I will tell you what I want. I want to remember where Sunny and Neffys are, so that I know when they will come back. I want them back so badly. But I can't, because I erased my own memories of knowing, that is a power of mine. To see, to know, to remember. Or to forget. She drew in a slow breath. And now I have to confront the possibility that they won't come back in time. Which means that I cannot rely on them to defeat the Dreamspawn. Which means that I must defeat him myself. But he is so vast, and I am so small. When he pressed me down and took my eye, I couldn't even move. All my weapons are gone or broken, and all I am left with is a tangled thread. Closing her one remaining eye, Cassie took a deep breath. How is Ariadne supposed to defeat the Minotaur without Theseus? 2904 Song of the Fallen. Cassie laughed quietly. Look, the Dreamspawn might have failed to infect me with the plague, but he certainly infected me with that damn metaphor. I just can't seem to get rid of it. She fell silent, and then forced out a smile. In any case, that is the reason why I am hesitating to betray your other self. It makes sense to ensure his rapid defeat to postpone the slaughter, so that Sunny and Neffys could return and save everyone. But if I can't hide in their shadow anymore, then this is it, this is the end. There is no tomorrow, and no hope if the King of Nothing is defeated. She laughed again. To tell you the truth, despite the fact that Mordred is watching my every step and listening to my every word, I still managed to fool him and build a trap. For him, right under his nose. It was not that hard, actually. He is not as good at runic sorcery as I am. So even if he saw me create the array and read every rune, what was the point? He only understood enough of its general form to sat his suspicion. He didn't see, had no capacity to see, the sharp knife I hid in the nuance, to drive it into his back at the right second and destroy him. The other Mordred stared at her from the mirror. After a long stretch of silence, he said in a subdued tone. He was expecting you to manipulate his memories. He was so focused on creating countermeasures against your aspect that he missed the real threat. Cassie shrugged. Naturally he did. That is the secret of magic, after all, attention, expectation, misdirection. The pledge, the turn, the prestige, what people see, what people cannot see. Like me, I am unseeing, and therefore remain unseen. And so, they never see me coming. She smiled faintly. Your other self was the only one who saw me for what I was, you know, and treated me with due diligence. But even he grew complacent after attaining supremacy. It is in the nature of the Supremes to be overconfident and arrogant, I think. So, when he saw me covered in blood and trembling, a mere saint, he let his guard down. Like I knew he would. She shrugged. Like they all do. The other Mordred sighed, then said Ketly. But you are saying these things aloud knowing that he is listening, which means that you have changed your mind, in the end. Cassie let out a bitter laugh. Have I? Yes, I guess I have. Just now. She raised her head and inhaled deeply. I'm tired. I am at the end of my wits. I don't even recognize myself anymore, and not only because my own memories are missing. All this deviousness, all these schemes, all these calculations, it is not in my nature. I think I heard your other self mention once that he simply reflected the world back on itself, and was therefore shaped by the world into becoming an exceptional monster. But he had been exceptional, to begin with. They all were. Children of legendary warriors, heirs of the gods, born under fateful omens, raised and nurtured by the crushing pressure of unimaginable adversity. She smiled wistfully. But I was just a normal girl. I had a normal childhood and normal parents. There wasn't anything exceptional about me, until I was faced with exceptional challenges, and was left with no choice but to rise to the occasion. So that was what I did. Right or wrong, I made one small choice after another, each twisting my form a little more. Until I couldn't recognize it anymore. So who was really shaped by this cursed world into what they are today, between Mordred and me? Cassie sighed and faced the mirror once more. I used to believe that Sunny and Neffys would return and save the day. But if I am honest with myself, it's all because of me. I set all of this in motion. I might have forgotten where they went, but I know that they left because of a message my past self had sent into the future. She must have had a plan, she must have had a vision. Cassie's expression hardened, turning colder and darker. So now, I choose to believe in myself. I choose to have faith in myself. I won't hope for their return anymore, so I will not betray your other self. Because he is all I have, just like I am all he has. A couple of monsters, forced to face a far more frightening abomination. She remained silent for a long while, and then reached toward the mirror. Tracing its cold surface with her fingers, Cassie raised her other hand and touched the blood-stained skin around her missing eye. But we, at least, have each other. While you have nothing, are you envious of me? Because he needs me, while all you ever wanted was to be needed. The other Mordred seemed to smile. I don't think I am capable of feeling envy, to be honest. I can pretend to feel it, though, if you want. Cassie sighed. He put you in the great mirror and kept you imprisoned there for so long. And still, you long to be needed by him, appreciated by him, valued by him. Because you think you love him. But how can you love him? You don't even know him. The other Mordred remained silent. She did, as well, and then said quietly. But you want to, don't you? To get to know him. To grow closer. Finally, he laughed. So, what is this? The pledge, the turn, or the prestige? Am I failing to see you as well, Lady Cassia? She shrugged. The greatest ruse is the one you cannot resist, even if you see it coming. But no, I am not here to deceive, manipulate, or use you. I simply want to give you what you want, for no other reason than that I can. Now that our end might be drawing close, I wanted to do something good for once, without thinking about how it would benefit me. The other Mordred seemed to shake his head. Sounds exactly like something that a person planning to deceive, manipulate, and use me would say. Still, what is it, exactly, that you want to do? Cassie smiled weakly. I already said it, didn't I? My power is to see, to know, and to remember. Or to forget. And ever since coming to the Ebony Tower, I've seen, I've gotten to know, and I remembered your other self, everything there was to learn about the years when the two of you were one being, and most of what there was to learn about the years you were apart. It was like I was there, with him. Up to the point when he had A in supremacy, at least. After that, containing his memories becomes quite hard. The other Mordred, one who had been separated from the only remaining part of himself, hesitated, then asked in a confused tone. Why are you telling me this? Are you taunting me, Lady Cassia? She shook her head. No, don't you understand? My power is to see, to know, and to remember, yes. But it is also to help the rest see, know, and remember. I am Song of the Fallen, after all. My fate is to sing about those I witnessed, not to bear the memory of them in silence. In other words, just like I took the memories of a lifetime spent alone from his mind. I can share them with you. I can help you experience all the things that he experienced, so that you come to know him. The other Mordred remained silent for a long while. Cassie waited for his response in the darkness, faced with only the coldness of the mirror under the fingers of her left hand and the hot, feverish slickness of her skin under the fingers of her right hand. Eventually, he whispered, "Why would you do that for me?" She inhaled deeply. "It's because I cannot see the future anymore, but I can still predict it. And I predict that you might need these memories, one day." He lingered for a few seconds, then said quietly, "No, that is not true. You're lying." He paused for a moment. "Instead, you think that you might need me to have these memories, one day. Isn't that right, Lady Cassia?" She smiled. "Is there a difference?" He laughed bitterly. "I guess not." "Ah, it's peculiar." There was a long stretch of silence, but eventually, he said, "I feel like I will regret taking you up on your offer. But at the same time, I know that I will regret it forever if I refuse it. In the end, all I will be left with is regret." Cassie lowered her head. "Still, it's better to regret something that you did than something that you could have done, but didn't. Believe me, I know that kind of torment well." The part of Mordred imprisoned in the mirror sighed heavily and fell silent. After a while, he asked, "So, what do I do?" Cassie leaned closer to the mirror until her face was almost pressed against it. "It's easy." She took a deep breath. "Just look me in the eye.